Well, hello there, Imagination Connoisseurs, and welcome to another Road Trippin' with R&B podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bawden, and you're listening to our podcast for Monday, June 6th, 2022. You know, Rob Burnett and I chat almost every weekday when he's on the road to on his way to the John Campea studio to work with John Campea and the rest of the Campea crew as they put together some great YouTube content. You really need to go ahead and check that out. But what do Rob and I talk about? Well, we talk about literally, quite literally, anything and everything. That's why we call these podcasts road trips, because you never really know where we're going to go. Although I will say this, today we have a little bit more direction than usual in that we are going to be reading and responding to letters from listeners of the podcast. We've got 4 really great letters that take almost a full hour to go ahead and go through. So I hope that you enjoy today's podcast. If you're an imagination connoisseur like Rob and like me, you probably will. After all, imagination connoisseurs love all things about genre entertainment, pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, horror, all that kind of good stuff. And we cover it all. I think you'll enjoy it. And like always, these podcasts start with a phone call that goes like this.
Well, good morning, Mike.
Good.
It is a bright new June day. It's very sunny outside. I had a relaxing weekend. Ready to start the week to talk about important entertainment news.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Good morning, and good. So good to hear from you. We didn't really have much of a chance to talk this weekend. I think we were both busy doing our different things. I was I was put to work by my wife and taskmaster to go ahead, and I spent like all weekend in the yard.
Well, there you go. That's good.
In the yard. Yeah, but it's all good. It's all good, man. And then we had rain last night, so everything looks all fresh and minty clean and ready to grow. You know, in this part of the country, just for those people who aren't clear as to what the situation is, Rob lives on the West Coast in Southern California. I live in the Midwest, right off the Mississippi River. We're separated by about 2,000 miles, and from a climate side, it's very different. You know, Southern California gets warm and hot and arid, and you know, there isn't a lot of rain.
And we're in our biggest drought in 1,400 years.
Right, and here where I live, we get rain every 3 days, whether we want it or not, and things grow like crazy. That's why this is the ag capital of certainly the United States, if not the world. I mean, it's just crazy. The gardens are exploding. The vegetable gardens are exploding. Farmers are getting things in the field when it's not too wet, and it's pretty amazing. This is the amber waves of grain part of America the Beautiful.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's nice, but I'm sure by Saturday I'm going to have to mow yet again, which is a 3-hour expedition on my riding mower because I've got a huge yard.
Sure.
But anyway, you sounded like you had a great weekend, and one of the highlights of the weekend was going to the theater and seeing Crimes of the Future, right?
Yes, that was always good to see a Cronenberg movie. I mean, you know, it was about what I expected. It was very, in a way, distancing. Mm-hmm. I was explaining this on the Let's Get Physical Media show. I mean, I liked watching it, but it was more like an intellectual exercise than it was a story that really enveloped me and pulled me in.
Right. I
felt it was, in a way, his formalism and the story he was telling, because it was such a construct. It was such a made-up scenario that I felt like I was distanced from it.
Right.
As opposed to being really inside of it, if that makes any sense. But that's okay. You know, that is a staple that's part of Cronenberg's oeuvre, I guess. Sometimes his movies are a little bit more accessible than others, but it was incredibly beautifully made, and I loved Howard Shore's score, and the acting was great, and it was thought-provoking. That's all you can ask for, Mike.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, Rob, talking about all you could ask for, you know how at the end of our shows last week we were asking folks to write in?
Yes.
We got a lot of that.
Wow.
I've got actually 5 really good letters. One of which I know you're planning on addressing during a live stream later, possibly today or later this week.
Yeah.
But let's just go ahead and do letters today. Are you cool with that?
I'm down with that.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the first letter. This is from Sonny Dominguez, who is writing about objective versus subjective conversations. And so he starts off by saying, "Good morning, Rob and Mike. I just began listening to Road Trippin' and thankful that Mike took my suggestion about putting the podcast on the PGS YouTube channel, making it easier for me to listen now." You and I could talk about that here in a little bit, Rob. But Rob mentioned that perhaps there will one day be a machine that measures people's enjoyment of art. I think it might be something that might already be explored, today. He said, "I participated in a focus group at Warner Brothers Studios years ago for a screening of the first episode of Swamp Thing. We got paid $100 and were strapped into a heart monitor machine that was placed on our heads, fingertips, and chest area. They mentioned it was to gauge responses to certain scenes and characters during our viewing. However, I'm not sure how it would be helpful, as I believe they had already filmed the first season. After the episode, we removed the devices and then had a roundtable discussion regarding what we just saw. I'm still unsure what the science behind it all was, but a few weeks later, a press release announced they wouldn't be doing season 2. Perhaps I was too vocal about my dislike of the show and caused others in the room to start agreeing with my criticism, because in the end, isn't it how we measure art? I will be honest, I'm a person who walks over to a person's physical media collection to size them up, to see if they're simply a consumer or a true aficionado. Hence why I enjoy being part of our community and actively participate on the Facebook group, even if it's with silly memes and thought-provoking discussions. P.S. Rob, you must grab lunch one day at Haldack in Fullerton. It's close to the studios. They have the best chicken sandwich I've ever had in my life. It's Korean and was worth the drive before they opened one in Eagle Rock." There you go. So not only are we getting thought-provoking questions from Sonny Dominguez, you're also getting restaurant suggestions, Rob. This is like a twofer.
I'm down with that. And, of course, Sonny Dominguez has been a longtime supporter. He would come on to the Midnighter, and I met him in person. He went and saw Tango Shalom.
That's pretty awesome. That is pretty awesome. Hey, wait, was he at the Tango Shalom that Caroline and I went to with you?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember.
I was gonna say, I'm just kind of an enigma. People are going like, "Hey, wait, we can now hear Mike's voice, but we've never seen him." They missed the one YouTube episode I put up on our channel. It's buried in the dross down there somewhere, but we could talk about that someday when it's I don't know, when we want to. But anyway, what do you think here about I hear a couple of interesting things in here that Sonny's brought up. One is his experience in dealing with a focus group, which I think it's hilarious that they strapped him up to a heart monitor and all these other kind of biometric devices to see if they could gauge his interest or his acceptance or revulsion at different characters. But what do you think? First off, what do you think about the use of focus groups, Rob? And then secondly, what do you think about the use of this kind of technology with focus groups? You have any thoughts? Because my experience with focus groups is very different.
Well, I mean, I don't think you can live in LA for any length of time and not have gone to a focus group for a movie or a TV show, even just out of curiosity, because there's always opportunities. Like, there's a company called NRG, the National Research Group. And 30 years ago, they would screen movies. I mean, they screen movies for a lot. But when I worked on the Warner Brothers lot, I wasn't supposed to go to those screenings, but I went anyway. And one of the guys on the lot worked for NRG, and he'd be like, "Hey, I got the weekly screening passes," and we would all go. and I worked in feature production, so I saw the executives that would be at these screenings, and they were always like, kind of perplexed. They're like, "Rob, what are you doing at a screening?" I'm like, "Oh, I work in feature production." Like, none of the executives would say you're not supposed to be here, because it was like the general public anyway.
Right.
I would go to all these screenings, and then what they would do is they would take like 20 people after the movie was over, and they would quiz them, or they would interview them. You'd fill out a card, but then they also would have a conversation with people. Problem that I always had with these research screenings is that they would ask questions like, what was your favorite part of the movie?
Mm-hmm.
And they would like give you answers. And the thing is, if you are posing a question to someone, they're going to give you an answer. It's leading.
Right.
So in a way, they've already made certain decisions about what they're looking for in these movies. And sometimes you could tell that people, like, famously, there's a documentary on the making of 12 Monkeys called The Hamster Factor. And that movie famously, it had a terrible screening. You know, it didn't do well at all when they got the cards back.
Right.
And the producers knew, they're like, you know what? These cards do not reflect the audience's enjoyment. When we show the movie to this audience, we know they enjoyed it more than these cards would reflect. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is because they do ask these leading questions. And while, to me, I really do think it's very important to show an audience a movie while you're finishing it.
Right.
Because, especially if it's a comedy, because if people laugh at your movie, they laugh at your movie, and you can see it and feel it in the room. And you'll know. Good filmmakers know. Mm-hmm. You know, good filmmakers are not working in a vacuum, because what you're doing is you're trying to craft a film to play to an audience. So good filmmakers know that. Sometimes you do need a little bit of an indicator if things play long or not, because you're too deep inside of it. But I'm a big fan of, call it a focus group, friends and family. Like, I like to invite people that I know want me to fail. So if I can get those people, if I'm like making a comedy or something and I invite people that I know love to see our movies fail, and I can make them laugh, then I'm like, oh, okay, it's working. You know, and I have no problem with that. But I think that focus groups, obviously, it's another way that a studio can mitigate their risk.
Right.
You know,
right.
They want to make sure that. And to me, it's like, look, man, it's already too late. Yeah. You've already made the movie.
Well, I think and I think that was Sonny's point, is like, haven't they already finished season 1, and why are they showing it to us now, asking what we think about it, you know? So, but that being said, you know, my experience. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, my experience with focus groups have been, of course, in the world of marketing. I've moderated a lot of focus groups, and the quality that you get out of a focus group depends entirely on how it's moderated. You don't want to lead participants to a particular answer or a set of answers, because that then isn't really research. What that is you're doing a sales job on a small group of people. And one of the things you learn early on when you're moderating focus groups is that people want to be seen as doing a good job. So they are looking for visual cues. They're looking for non-language, you know, almost NLP type cues from a moderator to try to figure out what is it that they want me to say, so that I can say that, so that I can feel like I'm part of the team and I'm accomplishing something. So what you have to do as a moderator is you have to ask open-ended questions, and you have to really be an active and engaged listener. And now, I've never participated in these kinds of focus groups where you're looking at movies or cuts of movies or TV shows or things like that and participated, but I would suspect that in many cases, the desire to mitigate risk can sometimes manifest itself in trying to arrive at a predetermined outcome from the focus group, and trying to get people to validate either decisions that have already been made that would be too expensive to fix, or to get them to vocally provide, additional voices to maybe a rebuttal or a concern that someone has, up the flagpole. Focus groups can be misused in that regard. And it's really, I think, important to try to make sure that if you have a focus group and you're running a focus group, you've got a really clear idea as to what you want to get out of it, and you don't put any kind of objective value on it. It's all subjective opinion. And like I always told clients, this is how we work on making sure that the tone is spot on, and that we're not running into any unexpected problems, either from a visual standpoint or from if a tagline just like falls flat, or if people don't get the joke. That's really good information to get coming out of a focus group. And like you said, test screenings, focus groups, things like that, especially for comedy, it can be very, very helpful in fine-tuning timing, fine-tuning jokes, changing jokes, dropping, taking things out. And there's a lot of things that you can fix, even if it's just, reaction shots that need to be extended just a little bit in a feature or something like that. Just you can make little adjustments based on how you hear the audience react to the gags that are in the film. But boy, I'd be really wary about making long-term, big, huge decisions based on, feedback from 20 people.
No, you can't. And it's problematic, especially when, you have executives who are chiming in. Sometimes you get great executives. That's not to say that all executives that work in Hollywood are bad, because they're not. A lot of the time, there are very smart, insightful executives. And, I've found that when you show somebody movies or something, if 3 or 4 people say the same thing, then you should look into addressing those things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who would say, like, oh, your protagonist looks too old to be where that. Well, that you can't fix that. So that's like, what are you supposed to do? Change the actor out? Those kind of comments, you know that you just have to dismiss them outright because they're not any good to you.
Right.
But, I really believe, like John on the John Campy show, John and I have a difference of opinion. He says that all art is subjective. And I think that's true of people, that people can have their own subjective opinions. However, I do believe that some art is objectively great. And then John always yells at me and then says, well, how do you measure that? And I said, we don't yet have a way to measure three-dimensionally how people are affected by certain things. Like, I would start with the AFI top 100 movies. Those movies generally are considered the best in the world. Now, there's a reason why there's a consensus about these movies. And it's not because they're subjectively great that a bunch of people think they're great. I think they're objectively great. And that means that for a vast number of people, who have a subjective opinion, these movies work on them, and they're from all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, backgrounds, whatever. And those movies work for a great number of people. And if they work for a great majority of people, it means to me that there are objectively things that are great about them that work across multiple levels, across many different people. And what are those things? We don't have a way to measure them yet, because we can't measure people's psychological reactions to something. We can measure their heart rate, like Sonny talked about, so you know if something's scary. But intellectually, if somebody has an emotional response, like they cry, how do you measure that? I mean, we can see that people cry, but what is it that triggered that response? We don't have a real way to scientifically and accurately measure it yet.
Right.
And I think that what we can go by is a general consensus.
Well, I think it's interesting. One of the things that you bring up is that there's no way to objectively measure that, and yet I would posit here that, as with Sonny's experience, where they're talking about using heart rate monitors, and whether they're using brainwave monitors or they're measuring foot twitches or finger twitches or whatever, that there is an attempt to try to go ahead and see if they can gauge physical reaction and tie that to to external stimulus that's coming in. And where you really see that is in the development of artificial intelligence for things like writing. I mean, there are now bots that you can buy that will write blog posts for you. And they're like, oh, it's never been easier to write a blog post. You just pump in a couple of keywords and let the AI go ahead and write the post. Well, I mean, it's more sophisticated than a Mad Lib if they're actually able to really pull this off. So clearly the technology is progressing to the point where John's objection that you can't measure these things may be, on its last legs at some point, because there may actually be a way to do that. And here's the concern I've got. If you can develop AI to identify what makes something objectively great, what's to keep you from having that AI go ahead and produce all the creative things that a person might ever want to see?
Well, I think that there's going to be an element of that in the future, but that, eventually, I think that as sophisticated as AI is going to eventually become, I don't think there is a human factor that is going to come out of things like being self-aware, understanding your own mortality, being able to fall in love, being literally to feel lust for another human being. These are things that you might be able to intellectually quantify, but you also have to be able to feel them. And feel them because you're like, to feel physical yearning. I mean, to have a physiological response as we men do. I don't know how you replicate that within AI. The response you might be able to replicate, but the reasons for it occurring,
right?
That idea, what's going on in you is I think unique, and it's going to take AI go a long way to replicate that kind of thing.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I think. I'm not an AI scientist, and I know that AI research is at the forefront of a lot of computer research now. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where it all shakes out. But I guess I'm optimistic in that the human experience is never going to be entirely replaced.
No, I agree with you there, and I thank Sonny Dominguez for sending in such a great question. I mean, it's just loaded. His letter is just loaded with all kinds of good stuff. We'll post this on the Post-Geek Singularity website so that people can go ahead and read it and discuss it more in our online communities on Discord and Facebook. But thank you very much, Sonny, for the letter. We sure appreciate it. And getting paid $100 basically to kill season 2 of Swamp Thing, I think your work there is done.
Yeah, screw you, man.
All right, next letter. This is from Matt Dewson. Matt is writing about artistic dissonance. He goes, "Hi, Mike and Rob. My name is Matt, and I'm a 32-year-old composer from Perth, Western Australia. I both love movies, and I love working on movies, and I think that both of these things have helped me develop a better understanding of storytelling. While watching Obi-Wan recently, I couldn't help shake this feeling of what I will term artistic dissonance. In music, there's a kind of unspoken understanding that a piano that is just barely out of tune is paradoxically more grating and annoying to hear than one that is completely out of tune. That's exactly how I would characterize the experience of watching Obi-Wan."
Wow, that's great. I love that.
It's as if they just kind of got close enough and hoped that flashing lights and fan service would get the show over the line. The result, of course, feels superficial and hollow. It's all the more frustrating because the bones of the show are right there. I'd love to hear what small changes you might make to the show that would clear up a lot of your gripes so far. Nothing massive, just small details. For example, in episode 3, I would have had Obi-Wan use his lightsaber for his encounter with the stormtroopers, only to get tagged and have to resort to a blaster. That way, we understand going into the Vader fight that his lightsaber skills are diminished since we saw him last. It's nice and simple. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts, gentlemen. Love from Australia, Matt.
Oh, I think he nailed it.
Yeah.
And that using the lightsaber idea is a great idea. And I think, look, you know, a lot of the problems that I have with modern genre television is that there is a lack of common sense in the writing. And I don't know where that comes from. And I think that lack of common sense, and this is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. You know, it really bothered me. Kenobi just picks up a blaster and starts just straight up murdering stormtroopers. And, you know, there's this idea that I get it, you know, and I think that's why George Lucas in the prequels wanted to have a droid army, because it was problematic that you've got these people that are recruits, stormtroopers that are working for the Empire. They're people.
Right.
And, you know, a Jedi in that scene, Obi-Wan, I mean, I understand they work for the Empire and they're a threat, but Obi-Wan straight up killed like a dozen dudes. And, you know, the Jedi are supposed to, the reason they don't use blasters is because they are defending themselves with their lightsabers. They're not supposed to be attacking.
Right.
You know, it's a defensive weapon, and when they have to, they will act. But when you watch something like that, in a way, I like the idea that you would set up that Obi-Wan's lightsaber skills are waning, or have been waning, because he hasn't used them. I think that's a great idea, but also, you know, to show that when he has to resort to a blaster and kill those guys, it's not a good thing.
Right.
It is an un-Jedi-like thing to do. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that throughout Obi-Wan, like when Obi-Wan Kenobi slips up and calls Leia when he's in the back of the troop transport,
right,
while they're driving with stormtroopers, it's like, come on. when he makes that kind of a mistake, your hero looks weak,
right,
and stupid. And I'm sure that in the writer's room somewhere, they're like, whoa, we have to make him look weak. Well, that's not the way to do it.
No.
You know, don't have him make some obvious mistake in the midst of the enemy.
Right. No, you don't make.
I mean, that just makes him incompetent.
Right. You don't want to make him look weak. You want to make him look broken. There's a difference between a broken hero and a weak person.
Yeah, and you think about like Unforgiven. Mm-hmm. You know, in Unforgiven, when Clint Eastwood realizes he's going to go off on this mission to make money to make his kids' lives better, and he starts he picks up a gun for the first time in how long, and he can't shoot. Mm-hmm. He can't hit anything, and you realize this isn't going to go well. And it's kind of that same thing with Kenobi wielding a lightsaber. But I think the problem with these modern shows is, when you watch Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, you never think to yourself while you're watching them, oh, well, this person wouldn't do this, or you're caught up, you're swept up in the narrative. And the narrative is like a big wave that's taking you as you surf into shore on this wave. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't, a great narrative never gives you time to stop and go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen. And I think modern Star Wars is full of the wait a minute moments. But we're all so desperate to love Star Wars, and we feel bad. Like, fans have a real problem. I get attacked all the time on Twitter. It's funny, I will criticize something specifically in a show, and yet people come back and insult me personally when I'm criticizing a story element.
Right.
And I always find that that's such an interesting phenomenon to me. I'm like, okay, you're not going to debate my point that I've made about something in universe in the show. You're just going to come back and call me an asshole.
Yeah. Well,
and I think that's problematic, because I try and restrain myself and keep my criticisms directed either at the show itself or at the writing.
Right.
Because I think it's okay if you don't like something, you can be critical of the writing.
Yeah.
Especially like an Akiva Goldsman, who wrote Batman and Robin, and who wrote the Lost in Space movie that William Hurt is in. It just, he's got examples of writing, genre writing, that is egregiously awful.
Yeah. Well, you know,
maybe it was because of studio interference or for whatever reason, but when there is writing that way, and I think it's okay to be critical, and those small things, that our viewers asking about, or our listeners asking about, he's absolutely correct. And like, even I'll give you an example, Mike, on Tango Shalom. You know, it's not the greatest movie in the world, but I worked on that movie, and we were finally able to take out everything that I didn't like. We edited the film until there's things we couldn't change, obviously, but there was things in the movie, the plot, that I couldn't stand, and I'm like, we're not done cutting this movie until everything that I don't like is taken out, within reason, plot-wise, story-wise, shot-wise, whatever was in there that I didn't like had to go. And we had to figure it out, because if we didn't do that, the audience would have bumped on it more than they already bump on things.
Yeah. Well, you know, I would say my problem with the Obi-Wan series is the same problem I have with most of the new Trek stuff that is prequel level material. And to use Matt's music analogy, I would say that my problem with all of this stuff is that to me, it kind of comes off as a sophomore level music theory project where you've been assigned, for your final, you have to write a 32-bar intro to your favorite song. And so you need to borrow part of the theme, but it needs to lead into the song, and you've got 4 weeks to go ahead and get your assignment done. And these guys don't really know how to get there. As you know, we've had this conversation time and time again. There are two things that really grate on me that will literally keep me out of the theater or keep me from watching a show, and that is, generally speaking, time travel and prequels. And the problem I have, for the most part, with prequels especially, is that if a prequel focuses on trying to tell more backstory to a main character, it's kind of self-defeating. Is there really any question that Leia is going to be saved in the Obi-Wan series? Is there any question that Captain Pike is going to live through any circumstance on Brave New Worlds? Because and here's the thing, with Pike it's even worse. I mean, Christopher Pike knows how he's going to get injured and die, or so he thinks, in 10 years. He knows he's got 10 years where he's got a frickin' hall pass to do whatever the hell he wants. To me, the logic of that is just bad. Take a look at well-written prequels, and what you find is, and I'll go back to my favorite of the moment, is Better Call Saul. We're not concerned about Saul Goodman and what's going to happen to Saul Goodman because we know he's going to make it to Breaking Bad. But everyone is concerned about what's going to happen to Kim Wexler.
Yep.
Okay? As long, and they have the perfect opportunity to do this with Obi-Wan. And they have the perfect opportunity to do this with Strange New Worlds. Focus on the characters we don't see in the thing that we're leading to, so that we can find out exactly what fate befalls them. They don't have to die.
And how does their fate affect our main character? And that's going to add our understanding of that character when he's in Breaking Bad. Exactly.
So
yeah, I mean, and this is again, these are easy things. I mean, look, as far as the Star Wars show is concerned, they are hampered by what we talked about before. They're hampered by their corporate overlords. You know, they have to provide a show that later you can have characters walking around a theme park that aren't offensive.
Right. Yep.
You know, at the end of the day, Kylo Ren's essentially got to be able to walk up to a 3-year-old kid with a smile on their face and brandish his lightsaber, even though he was responsible for the destruction of billions of lives.
Yeah, or like,
as long as nobody really thinks about that too much, and then it's okay.
Or Darth Vader's a fan favorite, right? And how many billions of people has Vader been responsible for killing in all the different Star Wars things? You know, but then the other piece on this is that so I'm not a big fan naturally of prequels unless you can do something about characters that are different from the ones that we are typically expecting, you know. And then you've got the whole time travel thing that just drives me absolutely crazy. As soon as you put a character, as soon as you give a character an ability to control their travel through time, you've given them an immortality card. They can just, it's like it's not like Live, Die, Repeat, because the great conceit in that was that even though Tom Cruise's character and Emily Blunt's character knew that they were in a time loop, the ticking clock there was that the aliens were figuring out how they were going to break the time loop and make death permanent, But
Right.
but for me, even in the original series of Star Trek, man, as soon as they figured out that all they had to do is like drive around the sun really fast to go back in time, it's like, wait, you could do that around any sun. I mean, that's like a get out of jail free card. It's like, oh man, things are going really bad in this battle. Let's go back a couple days and try it again. It's like nuts. It is nuts. I just despise time travel in general.
Well, yeah, I just think that you could change. Like, I love this idea that a piano that's just out of sync or out of tune a little bit is more egregious than one that's really out of tune. Because
that's
one
true.
That's really out of tune, obviously, is something's wrong.
Yeah.
And if it's a little bit out of tune, you're like, wait a minute, did I hear that? That becomes more annoying. Although I think with these Star Wars shows, it's really interesting because everybody wants to love them. Mm-hmm. I want to love them.
Yep.
I want to love Star Trek.
Too. Yep.
I wanted to, but when I watch it, I'm like, what I don't understand is, as an editor and a producer and filmmaker myself, I don't understand how you can sit in a edit bay and you can see something that is just glaringly off and not fix it.
Right.
Like, what? Isn't there somebody else in there going, let's take this out? And there's so many, like, especially in Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian, I guess I'm a little bit more forgiving because it's quick. Each episode's quick and easy and fun. Whereas I was expecting more from the Book of Boba Fett because it's called the Book of Boba Fett. I expected something different. I thought we were going to get chapters in Boba Fett's life.
You're expecting a plot in that book? Come on.
And then, Book of Boba Fett's not working. Let's do 2 Mandalorian episodes in the middle of the show. Okay. And then with Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's in such an interesting place. There's such an interesting story to tell there.
Yeah.
And instead we're getting, the Inquisitors. I don't care about the Inquisitors.
Yeah.
What it should have been is we should have had like a day in the life of these 2 guys, Vader now and Kenobi, that have both been shattered by their experiences. And if I'd made that show, I would have juxtaposed Kenobi's life and Vader's life and given us insight into both. And then you set up, maybe they can have a conflict, but then you set up where they ended up meeting on the Death Star.
Sure.
And it would have been really interesting. Like, how does Anakin feel about 10 years into Galactic Empire? Does he feel about being the Emperor's lackey, yet he's still trying to command their respect? Like, what's his life like?
Right.
I thought it'd be really interesting. And then you got Kenobi as well. And then, Vader finds out Kenobi's out there, or has known all the time. He's obsessed with finding him. And then you could use the Inquisitors, but then the Inquisitors, when you're looking at their infighting, you've got Reva is infighting with the Grand Inquisitor. And like, why are you guys fighting? Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be on the same team. I feel like you're all out for your own thing. You're bitching and moaning at each other. I'm like, the 3 of you are hunting Kenobi. You're doing this stuff together. I just don't believe, and I understand, well, there's ambition. But I'm like, you got to show a team cohesive and work together before you can show the cracks in it. And all we got was a team that was fractured already.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would have been nice to see, that was another thing. I thought that at the beginning of Phantom Menace, if I'd made Phantom Menace, I would have had call it a pre-title sequence, even though it would have been, where you see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn kicking ass. Like the Jedi's at the height of their power. Maybe they're quelling an uprising. They've stopped the Civil War. And you see the end of that Civil War, and the 2 of them just are at the height of their Jedi powers. They put an end to a conflict. They broke her a peace, and then they head back to Coruscant, as this is a day in the life of the Jedi.
Well, isn't that what the trade union episode was supposed to do? Was set that up to show them, to show how badass they were? But that was more like a Keystone Cops comedy to me.
Well, yeah, and that was the thing. And the thing about the Trade Federation, the Phantom Menace. What would have been interesting is basically essentially Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are cops.
Right.
And that's the thing. What I don't understand is Star Wars needs to follow the paradigm of other genres. I mean, when like George Lucas looked to Kurosawa, you know, I would have made the Phantom Menace the story of a mystery. These two, like, make it Chinatown. Mm-hmm. Or make it, you know, Lethal Weapon, where these two guys, these mismatched dudes, run across this drug trafficking operation from former Vietnam veterans. But in this case, there's a Sith Lord behind the scenes that they don't know about. Mm-hmm. You know, and there's a big grand conspiracy happening.
Is it just me though, or do the prequels and all of these series leading, and especially like this crazy Order 66 episode, the more video and the more content I see around Order 66, it was way more menacing when you saw just a couple of, you know, Jedi getting blasted down and stuff like that, and Yoda having his, you know, his moment where he was, you know, he needed his vapors or whatever it was, and while he's on Kashyyyk, that seemed much more menacing. But now the more meat they try to put behind this whole thing, now there are more Jedi that manage to avoid it. That it's like the only people more incompetent than the Sith appear to be the Jedi, and it's like, I don't get it. It's like the Jedi were supposed to be at the height of their powers, and they didn't sense the Sith in any way. Well, that's pretty bad. And then it's like all of these crazy things that are going on, and they don't seem to agree on how Anakin should be brought up, and they've got this and that and the other thing. So they seem to be kind of dysfunctional and never really all kind of headed the same direction. For a group that's supposed to be in touch with their feelings and in touch with the Force, they have like no direction. But they're going up against two guys. Because isn't it? It's like you can only have one Sith Lord and one apprentice at a time. That's like.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it just seems laughable. I mean, the more ominous they try to make it, the more cartoony it becomes, and to the point where it's like, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like there's a lot of evil villains in the Empire, but there's only like one devious character, and that's Palpatine. It's like none of the rest of them even really seem to plot anything. I mean, Vader kinda, but I would love it if he seemed to be much more, you know, intellectual and manipulative in his ability to make things happen. My God, he can use the Force. Why doesn't he use it to get other people to do his bidding more? You know, I don't know.
Look, I'm right there with you.
I don't know. The whole thing, it just seems like, you know, I just think it's too bad. Lots of opportunities lost, but a great letter from Matt Dewson, and I completely agree on the musical analogy used where it's just not quite in tune, that artistic dissonance. Strange fun fact, most fire alarms are set up to leverage an artistic dissonance in the tones used for the alarm, where they're literally like a quarter to a half step apart in order to create that grating sound so that you get up and out of your hotel room in case of a fire. So, in case you didn't know that.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
All right, next letter. This is from Tom. Tom is talking about a generational divergence. He says, I'm a grumpy old git. I'm middle-aged and about as happy or disappointed in my life as I'm probably ever going to be. I've never met true hardship, and being a white male, I'm about as vanilla as they come. Like many, I enjoy media as a distraction. I'm not really a fan of anything, just good stories well told. I was once more hopeful or deluded, as many generations before me. We would be on the moon, peace would reign, and we sorted all of our petty problems. I recognize not only has this not come to pass, a lot of others aren't even as happy or disappointed as me due to various bias humanities common consensus thinks about them. Not exactly sure if that's worded right, but I'll keep going. Our desire to be better betrays that previous generations wanted to be worse. No generation has ever had a monopoly of excellence in all fields, but why have this one seems to be more judgmental and righteous since the 60s were apparently? Why do modern audiences not tell stories for all generations anymore, bar those who have been persecuted in those generations? Whereas the multi-generational vanilla stories, those who will last the test of time, not break out, but largely forgettable story about some cause, however warranted, hopefully will inspire better ones. So little media I find today resonates with me anymore. Is this it? Am I spent culturally? Hopefully I'm just an abnormie and I'm a far minority, because right now we need unity, happiness, and just better stuff than we get. Side note, I really wanted New Trek to work, and they really looked like they tried. As they say in the UK, you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter. Star Trek Discovery was very shiny, but its insipidity wanted me to vomit. There we go. Because it was so insipid. I apologize, Tom, for not reading that correctly. Anyway, thank you for all you do, the knowledge, experience you bring to the entertainment you provide. Thank you for reading my not-so-merry ramble. So that was a rather rambling note from Tom there, but I think the general sense, Rob, tell me if you heard it differently. Tom's not a happy guy. He's grown up like the rest of us in this era where we came out of the late 60s, kind of, whether he grew up on Star Trek like you and I, or something else, maybe Doctor Who or whatever in the UK. But we kind of had this general sense of optimism that things were going to get better, that we had technology on our side, that we'd put men on the moon, that we'd managed to accomplish a lot. And even with the social strife, these were all things that we would be able to overcome, that there's a general can-do attitude. And instead, what do we get? We get the society the way that we have it today, and it's a grind, dude. It's a grind, and how do we deal with that? How do we come up with the hope?
But I would say things have gotten better. Mm-hmm. Medical technology has gotten better. Communications technology has gotten better. Look at the rise of the internet information. We have medical technologies, surgical technologies, micro-surgery technology. There's so much stuff that is better now that we've increased our abilities in the last 50 years. The problem is, at the same time, a bunch of bad shit rises in tandem with all of that. Suddenly you can converse with anybody around the world via video or Zoom or audio or on the computer, but what that does then is give rise to the fact that disgruntled people that felt alone and disaffected have now found one another. Mm-hmm. And they can create communities that are later become even dangerous.
Yep.
And that's a byproduct of that great technology that we've had.
I'd add one other thing too, is that this idea that a rising tide lifts all boats is really true. There, as you said, there are a lot of things that are a lot better today than there were 50 years ago. The problem is, of course, a rising tide also lifts the floaters.
Yes.
And so we're still going to have to deal with some turds. And I think the real key here is for people to intentionally adopt an attitude of trying to be positive about things. It'd be easy for us to be completely down if all we ever wanted to do was bellyache about Star Wars or Star Trek. And the fact is, they've given us plenty of opportunities to complain, but there's always tomorrow. There's always opportunities for new stories and better stories about those favored franchises. That being said, there's a lot of really great stuff out there that's being produced today. It's not necessarily genre fiction, which is kind of our main concern, but there is a lot of really good storytelling going on. There are a lot of really good movies, and you just have to look a little deeper. Now, we are going to be posting today on the Post-Geek Singularity website, we're going to be posting a list of suggested stuff that you can watch in June if you have HBO or Netflix or Hulu or whatever, that are really great films and really great series. And I would suggest that you not just get down in the dumps about some of the knuckleheaded decisions that some writer or some director makes on your favorite show, but realize there's a lot of good stuff that's out there. You just need to look for it and be willing to spend the time. One example is, I know a favorite show of yours, and that's For All Mankind, right, Rob? Now season 3's out. Yeah. And it's getting amazing reviews. They say the third season is the best yet.
Yeah, it's been the end of season 2, the last episode of season 2 is one of my favorite hours of television in the last 20 years.
That's amazing. So,
and I think that those are creators. It's really ironic to me that Ron Moore, who is the co-creator of that show, cut his teeth in the beginning of the 3rd season of Next Generation, and then went on to Deep Space Nine, and then went on and co-created the new version of Battlestar Galactica, and now has created a new original series. I mean, that's what you want. That's the trajectory you want from great creators, because great creators don't want to sit there and work on franchise properties.
Right.
I mean, the one thing, you've got Dave Filoni's a career Star Wars guy. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is he's a career Star Wars guy. Whereas Jon Favreau has made other movies and worked in technology, whether it was The Jungle Book or The Lion King, and starting out making indie movies like Swingers and doing a lot of other stuff. So that's good. Mm-hmm. But these old franchises, the people you grew up with them, it's interesting that these franchises you don't just bring them back. They've been here for 45 years,
right,
or 56 years, and it's like to expect them. It's so weird to me that they want to make Star Trek that harks back to the 60s. Let's make it episodic like the original show. I'm like, why?
Yeah. Why
would you want to do that? That's all. All you're doing is recreating something from 56 years ago, and that's not what we really want.
No. Well, and you it's very hard to catch lightning in a bottle twice. And Star Trek managed to do it, 3.5 times. That's pretty damn good, so come up with something new. It's really new, really original. Anyway, thanks to Tom so much for that letter. I've got one more if you've got a minute.
I do. I got to stop. I'm going through Starbucks.
Oh, okay. Well, real quick, here's a letter from Joe from Montreal, who is a big PGS participant, and thanks so much, Joe, for the letter. But his question is, why, Obi-Wan? Why? He writes, hey, guys, whenever I hear Star Wars enthusiasts endorse Disney Plus's Obi-Wan Kenobi, I want to throw my original VHS copy of the trilogy at the wall. They focus on critical issues that retcon stuff that happens in other films and say, well, I'm just nitpicking, and continue to praise the show for whatever reason. Look, if you're a Star Wars lover, giving them a pass just because it's Star Wars, it's hypocrisy. In the case of Obi-Wan Kenobi, that means they're okay with the fundamental changes that series has made to A New Hope. Why can't people see that? Are they just hungry for anything Star Wars? Have hundreds of Legends stories. They have hundreds of Legend stories that they can use and rearrange to fit their canon. Stop giving us mediocre versions of characters in past movies. I hope to God Andor will be an example of how to do it right. Ciao, from Joe.
Well, I think Andor, from what I've heard from a very reliable source, the show is great. Mm-hmm. But I can't agree with him more.
So,
and I think that's been, as somebody who has read, a lot of people scoff and laugh at tie-in fiction. But to me, Star Trek tie-in fiction was written by authors that were influenced by Star Trek, that really knew Star Trek. When you read the best of the Star Trek novels, they were great stories.
Right.
And now people are always saying to me, well, Rob, didn't you want the creators of Star Trek to go back in and be influenced by the novels? And I'm like, look, yeah, I wanted them to hire novelists to work on the show. I didn't want the writers that are being paid big bucks to write TV to go pilfer ideas, uncredited. They're literally plagiarizing from the writers. And then there are people that say to me, well, Paramount owns those books. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they do. They own books that were specifically written by an individual. That book, they might own it, but the idea that somebody would go and lift elements from books whole cloth that one author created and use them as the basis for your main characters of your new show would seem to me that you can't just get away with that just because Paramount owns the books. They're still plagiarizing. And one, I'd be like, why would you want to do that? And I mean, the Pike story with him knowing about his fate, was stolen from Margaret Wander Bonanno's Burning Dreams, and Una's entire backstory was stolen from DC Fontana's book Vulcan's Glory. And the question that I have is, when you're being paid as a TV writer, I don't expect you to rip off other work from other authors. Yeah, do you guys have any double smoked bacon cheddar sandwiches today?
We do.
Could I get one of those?
All right.
And could I get a Trenta unsweetened black iced tea?
So here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Rob is ordering a Burnett breakfast.
And I would love to get a venti.
We'll see. What are the odds he's going to order a side of world peace? We'll find out.
Perfect. Anything else for you?
Nope, that'll do it.
12.95 with CFP out the window. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, whoever had no world peace as a side order paid off today.
There you go. So I mean, that's the thing, and I think that so there's a lot of great ideas. Like, here's what I don't understand. I don't understand when you have all of this extra material, the whole Legends universe, all of these books to draw from. If you're going to do that, like with Star Trek, go in and do it big time.
Right.
Hire your story group to go in and take all of those ideas that are all there, because you're doing it anyway. You know, you're mixing and matching. Discovery stole a whole storyline from David Mack's book Control, Section 31 Control. They don't even make any bones about it. The AI, the evil AI, was named Control.
Yeah.
In the show.
Yep.
And it's like, if you're doing that, bring in those authors and pay them. Dorothy Fontana's dead, but bring in David Mack. They did. He was actually a consultant on the first season of Prodigy. But why are you a consultant, dude? They're stealing ideas from novelists that are still around. Why aren't those novelists the ones writing the scripts?
Good question.
Why do you have a proxy? Why do you have a middleman? Why not go back to the people whose work you're stealing from, hire them as writers, and pay them? To me, that is completely unprofessional, and it's counter to what the Writers Guild of America was set up to do. And this idea that people are like, well, you know, they own those books anyway. Yeah, okay, but you now have writers that are taking credit for work they didn't do.
Right.
Not only that, they're getting paid residuals for it.
Right. It's entirely possible they could.
I don't understand how, if I was a showrunner, I would say to those people, if you're fucking stealing ideas for, hey, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
Doing well.
Awesome.
But thank you. If you're stealing work from other writers and passing it off as your own, you're out. You're fucking fired.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are not doing the job we hired you to do. I didn't hire you to steal work and concepts from other Star Trek novelists, especially not to define our main characters.
Well, we hope that the instruction from the showrunner was, we want new and original stories. Is it entirely possible that the showrunner or the executive producers, whoever's in charge of the shape and direction of the show, said, let's go ahead, we've got all of this content that's out there, let's go ahead and mine it and just make episodes around that? Is that possible?
Sure. But you know what? Credit the writers.
Yeah.
Story by.
Well, you know, you and I have talked about this, and that really is that's a ethical decision made by the people responsible for the values of the corporation making the show, right? Because you and I have talked about the stuff that we want to produce. We want to make sure that we acknowledge the contribution of all the creators, and that the creative people involved in all those projects are treated equitably. And, you know, I think that's not necessarily the case in every production company. I think that, you know, there is a lot of greed in this business because there's so much money floating around.
I know.
So.
But treat people well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, great question, though, from Joe at Montreal. Thank you so much. I think Joe, you would find that your letter is parked in this, is a perfect example of parking in the same shuttle bay as Rob. When I read this letter, I'm like, yeah, this guy totally understands what Rob and I have been talking about, and this is definitely in sync with so many of the comments you've made, Rob, about the Obi-Wan series in particular, and your hopes for Andor as well. So,
well, I think here's the frustrating part about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who's literally been reading Star Trek novels since the 70s, if somebody said to me, okay, and there was even a Pike comic book that Marvel published,
mm-hmm.
You could literally go and say, okay, we are going to do a Pike TV series. We've got all of this material. Let's gather up all the Star Trek novels that have Pike as a character, the comics and everything, and let's lay them out. And that's where I would begin.
Right.
And go through all that, and we're gonna use this, and we're gonna use this and this, and we're gonna give story credit to these writers and fucking pay them.
Yeah.
Even if it's only like $5,000 or whatever. We put that in the budget.
Yeah.
Give them story credit and pay them.
Absolutely. It's the right thing to do.
And when you're sitting in a writer's room breaking stories, well, here's what we've already got. We have a place to start from.
Right.
What's the harm with that?
So,
and just because they're already, it's so weird to me that, well, they already own these. That's true of anything. An author owns his work, even though they're paid to do it. It doesn't mean they didn't write it.
Right.
So Paramount might own it. What does that have to do with whether or not a writer should get paid? Well, they've already been paid. They were paid to write a book. They weren't paid to have their work adapted into another medium.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get around the semantics of it. What I find so interesting is that when you have these conversations, people are always looking at me like, well, Rob, you're nitpicking, and, isn't that what you wanted? And I'm like, I never wanted people to have their work uncredited and stolen.
Right. Well, there's two things there, Rob. There are the people that say, well, you don't legally have to do this, but, there are the right things to do, right? And part of it is, it would be good to pay people or to compensate them if you're going to use their creations in a different medium. And things get a little fuzzy there, but at a bare minimum, you should acknowledge their contribution to the story.
Yeah.
Now, by doing that, there's probably financial compensation that is tied to that under WGA rules or whatever. I haven't checked, but that's okay. Just make that part of the process. People should be concerned about doing the right thing, not necessarily just the legal thing.
Yeah. It's Star Trek.
Yeah.
It's part of what the show's philosophy would be about.
Exactly. Of all the franchises, the one that you should be, there are very few television shows that have that kind of moral high ground like that, where it would almost be a dictate from the show in terms of the show's values. It's important that you epitomize those values in your practices if you're going to be making that show, right? You don't expect a bunch of pirates to be making Captain Kangaroo or Sesame Street. So,
no.
Anyway.
No, and that's why I get angry about that, because these authors are being paid. They're actually getting paid more money. If Paramount owns those stories already, why then are the screenwriters getting paid to take the work of other writers?
Right.
That's essentially what they're being paid to do. They're being paid to take other writers' work and pass it off as their own.
Right.
And especially when you take, like, one author did something very specific about number one's background.
Right.
That's the only place it could have come from. And now there is an episode that exists that establishes that in a different medium, in TV, and that character's background is now going to be attributed to the writers of that episode.
Right.
When they didn't come up with it.
Well, and they get a story by credit, right? And there's money associated with the story by credit. And yet, if you looked at the script, there would be a certain number of pages that would literally be the Cliff's Notes version of DC Fontana's book. Yep. Pretty much. I mean, it could as easily be a Cliff's Notes version of the storyline. So. Yep. So and what is a typical story by credit for a half-hour TV show? It's like $15,000 or something like that.
Something like that. You can make a lot of money.
So, if half the story is basically lifted from DC Fontana's book, in theory, her estate would be entitled to $7,500, and she should get a credit.
Well, the argument would be that, well, they already own that story. And I'm like, okay, they already own it, but the writers who wrote that episode, are they then being paid to go and, like, if it was a Star Trek novel that wasn't owned by Paramount, like, would they steal from another author?
Right.
Is it only because they own that Star Trek novel already? Just include, all I would say is, just give her the credit. Story by DC Fontana and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Nothing wrong with that.
Or based on a story by. I mean, there are lots of ways that you could handle it where you would ethically be doing the right thing, and there may be some financial consequences to doing that. But, when you're talking about a per episode budget of how much for Strange New Worlds?
Millions of dollars.
What's $7,000 to $10,000 going to cost you to do the right thing?
It's going to buy you self-respect.
Yeah. Well, think about too
and from a make YouTube videos about how you ripped off things from another writer.
But also think from a fandom standpoint, all that does is reinforce the brand. I mean, if you can say, hey, we found this amazing DC Fontana story and wanted to breathe additional life into it and put additional legs to it because more people need to see it. All you're doing is making yourself look good. I don't know. So anyway, that's just me.
On that note, Mike, I must say goodbye.
Rob, this was fun. This was only letters, so tomorrow we're going to have another in-depth conversation if you're up for it. You good? Good with another road trip?
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, buddy. Take it easy. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, adios.
Yep. Take care. Bye. Wow, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? That brings us to the end of yet another road trip on the ROADTRIPPIN podcast with R&B. ROADTRIPPIN is a production of Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited LLC and is transmitted throughout the Post-Geek singularity from our studios in a very small lamp sitting on a shelf in a cave in the middle of the desert. Just rub it right there. There, that feels better. Thanks. You can find ROADTRIPPIN on your favorite podcasting platform too if you don't want to rub our lamp. Some fun you are. And you can also find it on our website, postgeeksingularity.com. We also post links to our podcast on all of our social media accounts. You'll find the PGS on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, Discord. What? I'm missing one. Tumblr. There you go. We're still working on that Tumblr page. It leaves a little bit to be desired, but we'll get there. Just have the faith, stick with us, and send us your suggestions. You can access our Discord server, by the way. If you go to our website, you can click on, we've got links like on every single page saying join the community discussion online. You click that, you go to a Discord server. You can choose from one of dozens of discussion boards and get into conversations with hundreds of other Imagination connoisseurs just like you about talking about the things they love. Also, our email newsletters are free and opt-in only. We've been sending those out again with a little bit of regularity. We'll have another one go out tonight. It's easy to sign up. You can either sign up by clicking on the button that's just about on every single page saying, get this, sign up for our newsletter. Or if you haven't been to our website, Post-Geek Singularity, before or over the last few weeks, when you get there, you'll be entreated to a delightful little pop-up menu where you can go ahead and sign up for our newsletter right there. It's easy, it's free, and it's not meant to be annoying. You can opt out of these things anytime you want if you feel you're getting too many email messages from me. I won't take it personally. Not really. Okay, don't forget, you can always also send us a message if you go to our website, postgeeksingularity.com. There's a big button right on the front page that says send the show a letter. send us a letter. We want to hear from you. Today's show was so much fun. We want more letters, so we hope to hear from you soon. And we hope you join us tomorrow on another road trip with R&B. I'm your host, Mike Bodden. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.